So, speaking of hats, I wear one on my head tonight that allows me to make my introduction of Mark very brief. That's because the expression on the hat, I see a number of you are wearing it as well, says it all. It says, "I stand with Mark Levin." And I truly do. So now, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please stand and welcome Mark Levin, as it is a great honor to have him here. Well, Mark, welcome back to the Reagan Library.
You know, first of all, I want everybody to know what a wonderful human being, patriot, and person John Highbush is, and a dear, dear friend. And I want to thank you very much. If we can give him a hand, please. Just an extraordinary human being who he and his staff make this magnificent facility function, and it is an honor to be invited every time to the Reagan Library. I wouldn't miss it under any circumstances. And thank you all out there for coming tonight. I have the best audience in radio and the smartest audience in radio. But thank you very much for having me.
Okay, let's get this started. Okay, now, Mark, you've been here before, Ameritopia, Liberty and Tyranny. You've written other books, several other books. And I've told you before, sometimes when I read them, occasionally I get a little depressed, because you have a...
Don't blame me. I mean, I'm...
But you have an extremely succinct way of describing some of the drift, the troublesome drift that our country finds itself in, because we oftentimes lose our way and lose sight of what the Constitution's been all about. So I've been on Mark's case. He certainly didn't write this book because I've been bugging him. I think it's been bugging him for years, but I've always asked myself and Mark, what do we do about the situation? And that's why I was so pleased to see you come forward with the Liberty Amendments. And I noticed as I read the book, it seems to me your message, the process whereby you think Americans can get involved and change things, is not by a traditional march on Washington, because you certainly don't see Washington, D.C. as being the solution. Rather, my question for you is, given the theme of your book, do you think that our good audience or your listeners throughout America ought to be marching on their state capitals to drive what you think is part of a solution here?
Well, here's the thing. When you study what's been going on in this country, and when you look at how it's happened, for the last century or so, it's all Washington-centric. It's all top-down. And the left has been very successful at this. We ought to accept the fact that they've succeeded. And what have they succeeded at doing? They've succeeded at wiping out federalism for all intents and purposes. They've succeeded at using the law through the Supreme Court to impose their will as if it's some constitutional mandate. Obamacare is just the latest example, but the worst. Congress now passes these massive pieces of legislation that not a single one of us has read, with 20,000 pages of regulations that not a single one of us is capable of reading, that affect our lives. We have a massive bureaucracy with over 4 million individuals, some of whom are great, some of whom are not, issuing 3,000 laws a year, many of them with criminal penalties. So many criminal penalties that the Congressional Research Service Can't even determine how many. And as I say on the air, the circle of liberty that surrounds the individual is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And many states, like this one, are no better. And but the framers understood this. The framers understood that humans are imperfect and these institutions are imperfect. And so what did they do about it? They created a constitution that creates a matrix of institutions and authorities for imperfect people and imperfect institutions. And they thought the worst possible threat that faced this country or any country is a centralized government with concentrated power, whatever the form. You can read Adams, you can read Jefferson, you can read Madison, Mason. All of them talked about the same things, and they weren't the only ones. They took it from John Locke and Montesquieu and others, excuse me, and that's why we have 3 branches of government. They didn't sit there and think that up. That comes directly from Montesquieu. That's why they talked about a civil society. They didn't think that up. They came from many philosophers, including Locke. And so what these men did in Philadelphia in 1787 is they looked throughout history and human experience, men of faith, and they decided to create a nation under our Constitution. If you look at Washington today, it's a long way getting to your point, but if you look at Washington today, it's not a federal republic because the states that gave the federal government birth have almost no say in its behavior today. In fact, they live at its behest. It's not a constitutional republic because I can go through the Constitution, and I do to some extent here, in which major chunks of the Constitution have been eviscerated. And when a president says he's going to fundamentally transform America, he doesn't have the authority to fundamentally transform America under the Constitution. When you look at what the Supreme Court's been doing in its decisions, piling one personal opinion on top of another, telling us it's precedent, and there's nothing we can do about it, there's no recourse, that's not a representative republic, so what is it? I don't know what it is, but it's not a constitutional republic to a great extent anymore, which is why I talk about restoring the American Republic. We have to accept the condition of the nation in order to address it. Now, given that, other than a handful, which politicians are even talking about this? Almost none of them. Almost none of them talk about the Constitution. Almost none of them talk about federalism. Or if they do, it's a throwaway line, it's a platitude. Almost none of them talk about what do we do about a Supreme Court that imposes where you have one justice who moves in one direction or the other, and all of a sudden that's constitutional credo for the rest of time without any recourse. Jefferson is spinning in his grave over this. And other aspects of this. So you have to ask, well, what do we do about this? Well, you can elect more people and send them to Washington. That doesn't seem to work very well. I'm not opposed to it. Fight them in the primary, send as many conservatives as you can. I don't preclude that at all. I'm just not sure that's a great answer. We can rally. I've been at these rallies. I've spoken at these rallies. They laugh at us because what do they figure? What are we going to do about it? In 2010, there was a major election. Has anything changed in the leadership of the House of Representatives? Nothing, from my perspective, or nothing that's going to address what's going on. So we basically have the statists in one party, and in many respects the neo-statists, as I call them, in the other party, who are relatively status quo, relatively comfortable with what's going on, and really don't want to address any way of breathing life back into the Constitution and into civil society. So we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to accept this? Is this inevitable? I mean, the trajectory is obvious. This magnificent institution is built around a man who for 8 years fought this and rejected this and spent his life talking about it, articulating it. And that's 8 years. And then after those 8 years, they lurch back into the same direction. His party does, my party does. The other party lurches extra hard when they control both houses of Congress and the presidency. So I just see us going in one direction. So where do we look for answers? Well, I mean, apart from faith and apart from cultural issues, for governmental answers, we have to look at the Constitution. And the framers were so brilliant, they thought this day might come. I write this book to give attention to what they did, not to substitute what they did with Mark's opinion. And in Article 5 of the Constitution, there's two methods for amending the Constitution. The first method, which has been used for the Bill of Rights and 17 other amendments, and the other method they put in there is a special method. To quote George Mason, 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention, September 15th, 1787 in Philadelphia, should the Congress become oppressive, there must be a way for the people to respond short of violence. And he insisted on that second method for amending the Constitution. And it was unanimously adopted at the Constitutional Convention. And then that document went to the states for the state ratification convention. And if you look at the Federalist Papers, not just Madison, but Hamilton points to that provision in Article 5 to try and assuage states who weren't sure whether they were going to ratify the Constitution or not, among other things. They point to that, and they say, we don't really know what you're all worked up about, because if the federal government gets too tyrannical, you have this power, states, collectively, 2/3 of you, to call a convention to propose amendments, not a constitutional convention, a convention to propose amendments, and 3/4 of the states can ratify. But before we get into how difficult that is, I just want to make the point that a lot of people, oh, constitutional convention. No, it's not a constitutional convention. The Constitutional Convention occurs every time the Supreme Court meets. The Constitutional Convention occurs every time Congress meets. The Constitutional Convention occurs every time the bureaucracy puts out 3,000 laws every year. The Constitution's being churned and churned and churned and churned. And what I'm talking about is the method that the framers gave us, not some extra or unconstitutional method that is taking place today. And I start from the premise that we need to change a lot of the decision-making authority, as the framers would have intended, from what's going on today back to where it was supposed to occur. And I'm going to get into later, depending on the questions and so forth, or on my own, why we shouldn't fear this process and so forth. But I find people who defend the Constitution today, many of them aren't defending the Constitution. They're defending the status quo, what's going on today. I'm defending the Constitution. I'm trying to get it reestablished. They are defending what's going on today, which is something other than constitutionalism. So, you know, I'm trying to get people to think about this, to talk about it, to argue it, to debate it, the way the framers would have, the way the framers wanted us to, and it is the framers who came up with this idea, not me. And what I do in the book is I propose 11 amendments. Not that they're not chiseled in granite. It's not, oh, Mark's got 11 amendments, so they're going to be adopted. It doesn't work that way. If you have a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments, they will consider certain proposed amendments. What I'm doing is saying what's possible. And by the way, I'll get to it later, why the left cannot hijack, quote unquote, the convention process. We'll talk about it as you wish, but that's the theme of the book.
So of the 11 amendments, as I counted them.
And by the way, the libs attacked, there's 10 amendments, then you know they haven't read the book. There's 11 amendments. 2 of them are in one chapter, and I see these people criticizing me. Oh, look at this 10 amendments. Okay, great. Anyway.
All right. Well, I counted 11. And I noticed they range from everything from term limits for members of Congress, to laws that would protect private property. And I know you're going to say this is an unfair question. I don't care. I'm going to ask it anyways, and you have to answer it. And that is, if this convention, if only one of these amendments could survive, if one made it all the way, which do you think is the most important of all those that you've recommended?
Well, it is a difficult question because there's a lot of, these amendments are written one to fit with the next. But one of them in there says that the states could amend the Constitution directly by a 2/3 vote. I figure if the Supreme Court can amend it by one justice, and if the President can amend it by refusing to comply with the law, and if Congress can amend it by writing Obamacare, then what the hell? 2/3 of the states, that's pretty tough to get, should be able to amend it directly. And the question might be, well, listen, Mark, that's all well and good. But if the Congress and the federal government's not going to adhere to the Constitution today, why would they adhere to these amendments if you pass it? Anybody have that question? I'm ready for you. The answer is the decision-making authority for most of these amendments is taken away from the federal government and given to the states. The states will make the decisions, and it doesn't matter if the federal government listens or not. The states won't have to listen to the federal government because it's the states that will make the decisions. I don't believe in nullification. Some of you may and so forth. I reject nullification, particularly when the left nullifies my Constitution. And that's pretty much what they've been doing. So, you see, in Ameritopia, I explain it, the left despises the Constitution because the Constitution limits them. The Constitution prevents them from doing, or supposed to, what they do. It puts all these barriers in the way and these checks and balances, and all these stupid states are in the way and all the rest of it. So they reject the Constitution. And so it's our job, my job, other people's argument, to keep bringing it up, keep arguing for it. And the point is the Constitution, what they've done is they've twisted things. For instance, the Commerce Clause, the purpose of the Commerce Clause, you ready for this, is to promote commerce. So, before they met in Philadelphia, some of the states sent delegates to Annapolis. And they met in Annapolis because the states were killing the states. They were putting out different currency, they were obstructing trade, they were blocking navigational waters and so forth, and the states said, we got to get together and work this out. And that's very important to understand. The states did this all the time. They would get together at a convention. A convention is a meeting. And they would work out their differences and come up with certain agreements. And those of us who are conservatives in here, which I figure is about 99.9% of us, which is very refreshing. If only America. But anyway, the states would do this all the time, and they would send delegates to these meetings and give them direction, the state legislatures, on what it was that they were supposed to discuss. They weren't plenary or general conventions. They were conventions that would get together for the purpose of discussing specific things, which is the point of my proposals, and also brings us back to the point of this convention for proposing amendments. It is a convention for proposing amendments. The language in the Constitution itself is limiting. But Mark, this constitutional convention, what will stop the libs from hijacking? Anyone have that question? You have an answer? The state legislatures choose the delegates. The state legislatures agree in advance what the subject matter is going to be. It might be the Supreme Court, it might be something of that sort. It can't be, we're just sending a bunch of people into a convention to have a discussion about the Constitution. Can you think of any state that would do that? No. There's at least 14. What'd she say?
California.
Well, that's a good point. But there's at least 14 red states that would say no, so that wouldn't. But, you know, even California, you have these really dark blue states that are getting pretty much what they want from the federal government. They don't want a convention to discuss anything. They have their conventions. They've got their justices. They've got their president. So the top-down model is their model, which is why they reject the Constitution and why I've been attacked by the left on this suggestion. But the left can never control this process because the state power is more diffused. And so their power is concentrated in metropolitan areas, among other places. So yes, you have states with heavy metropolitan areas and so forth that will be difficult, but you have a lot of states that won't. 27 state legislatures right now are Republican. 5 of them, 5 state legislatures are half Republican. Now, 5 and 27, by my count, that's 32. It takes 34 to call for the convention. Now, we haven't even started. We're just starting to talk about this. So, I don't want us to say, oh, Mark, this will take forever. That's the other thing that drives me nuts. The liberals never stop. They just are at it, they're at it. 100 years, they want health care, they finally get it, and what do they say? We're not done. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. So they have a 1,000-year plan, which is no plan at all. It's to take your liberty and property and centralize government, right? Do they stop? Are they going to stop? And if we don't get something in 3 weeks, what do we say? Oh, woe is me. What am I going to do? I personally am tired of that, of the naysayers and the defeatists, because that's what makes what the other side does inevitable. But it's not inevitable. So there are groups here, I think. Some of the people who came by and said, I'm running this group on the Article 5 and other groups. So this is the beginning of a process. And keep a couple other things in mind as I'm rambling along here, John. Keep a couple other things in mind, and it's this. I don't believe in static economics, and I don't believe in static politics. This state 25 years ago could elect a Republican. Today it can't. I don't know what it's going to be 25 years from now, but what it is right now is unsustainable. And that goes for New York and Illinois and Michigan and a whole bunch of them. They're going to collapse at some point. It's just the way it is. And they don't have printing presses either. You don't hear. And you can borrow as much as you want, and the federal government can try and bail out as much as it wants, but there is a day of reckoning. The laws of economics are just as sure as the laws of physics. It's just a matter of time. So when these events occur, the unraveling occurs, and at some point something, in my view, will happen, that's when we need to have a constitutional, civil, legitimate option available in a lot of these states, too. So, you know, I don't want us to be Pollyannas about this and put a smiley face on it. I don't believe in that either. This is hard. This is daunting. This is difficult. But there is a way. There is a way, and short of, well, let's just elect more Republicans. Okay, do it. And from the first 6 years of the last Republican presidency, they increased the debt more than any presidency in American history. They expanded the federal government and Medicare and education and on and on and on, only to be outdone by this presidency and this administration. But when you have the ruling class and the governing masterminds in Washington who pretty much agree on 80%, there has to be another way. So I say let's fight at that level, but we have another way to address this too. And the truth is, if there are 3-4 states that are prepared to throw out the Constitution, it's over, isn't it? If the people don't want to live free, they're not going to live free, are they? If we've lost virtue, then we're a virtueless society, aren't we? You can't fix all that through governmental entities. It's a cultural thing, it's a faith thing, it's a religious thing where people have become unmoored from these principles and belief systems. But also, there are tens of millions of us who are not unmoored from these systems, these belief systems. I mean, you know, it's not like they're winning 60% of the vote. They're getting 51, 52, 54% with millions of people sitting home. So I still have hope, and I still think that the doom is not inevitable, but I also believe that we have to begin talking over the dinner table and breakfast table and with our neighbors, those of you who are Republican groups, conservative group, whatever groups, about the possibilities of this process. And don't fear what the framers did. Embrace it. Embrace the Constitution. Be the people who embrace the Constitution, because nobody else is. And if somebody has a better answer, I'm ready to hear it.
Okay, so we have 1,500 people here. We have many thousands that are tuning in on our website, on your website. And you talk about this to millions of listeners Monday through Friday. Practically speaking, what would your advice be? Okay, tonight, go home, get a list of your state legislators and start writing. Or if you are affiliated with the Tea Party organization, make this job one of that present organization. Or why don't we at a grassroots level start a Liberty Amendments organization? I'm sure people have asked you about this. It's, you know, there's this yearning for, now what can I do specifically? And what's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and I talk to people about being the Paul and Paulette Reveres of your neighborhoods and so forth, and I talk about this in Liberty and Tyranny too. You know, there are tens of millions of us. If we speak to 10 people and we convince 2 or 3, there's many more millions of us. So at a minimum, because I know everybody's not going to run out there and start a group or join a group or whatever, but at a minimum, why don't you start talking to your family members and your friends and your coworkers and your neighbors and make this something that people can at least start to think about? Because I bet you talk to your neighbors and they go, can you believe this Obamacare? Can you believe, my God, where are we going to go with this? Do you believe this? Say, I agree with you. Now let me tell you about something. And talk about it. Well, Mark, I can't talk about it the way you do. I'm not that knowledgeable. That's why I wrote this. So you can talk about it to the extent you want to talk about it. You don't even have to read the whole book. I even put the first chapter out there for free. Read the first chapter. That'll give you enough information. But, you know, ideas, as I say on there, have consequences. And the only idea in the United States is not an authoritarian, centralized government with an iron fist. I think our ideas are better. And I think when people better understand them, I'm not talking about the drones. You know, the drones are the drones. You know a drone, after you spend about 15 minutes with them, give it up. And just find somebody else who's willing to listen. These are people who are dug in ideologically and so forth. Spend your time talking to 2 or 3 or 4 other people. As for, I'm not the leader of the organizing front on this. There are other groups out there that have already begun to talk about this. The Tea Party groups have already begun to talk about this. And I think if more and more of us talk about it, and at town hall meetings and at events like that, you realize we may not even need a convention to get the attention of Washington, D.C. If they think we're close, I'm not going to curse here because this is a hallowed institution, and some people make it but boy, you know what they'll do in their pants? If we're close. So, I just think that in addition, you know, how many of you think, let's try it this way, how many of you think just electing more Republicans will fix this? Might slow it down, right? And yet, most of us don't want to elect the leftists, right? So we feel like we're kind of stuck and that nobody really speaks for us. So I say, it's time we speak for ourselves. That's... And you go into those town hall meetings and you ask them, do you believe in the Constitution? Yes. How so? I love this music. What is that music? But seriously, You ask your member of Congress or your senator that you believe in the Constitution, I would love to know what their answer is. They'll say yes. Well, what part of it do you believe in? When's the last time you read it? What does Article 5 say? And they go, well, we don't want this runaway convention. How can there possibly be a runaway convention when the state legislatures choose the delegates, the state legislatures can remove the delegates, the state legislatures determine the subject matter of the convention, and 3/4 of them have to approve what comes out of the convention? What runaway convention? We have a runaway federal government right now, and that's what we're trying to address. The bottom line is, we the people have a lot of power. Yeah, it's hard when I talk to folks in the blue states, you go, oh my God, you about Jerry Brown? I do. I do. But every state is not California. And some states are on the cusp. And every state legislature isn't your runaway assembly here. We don't need 100%. And we're not going to get 100%. I live next to a state we call Maryland. It's every bit as crappy as the government is here. Maybe even worse, if you can believe that. So anyway, but you know what's worse than California, Maryland? The federal government. The spending, the borrowing, the taxing, the regulations, the whole thing. Worse than California, New York, worse than the worst of the blue states, and you're in one of them, is the federal government. And the problem is you can't escape the federal government unless you leave the country. You can escape your state, but you cannot escape the federal government. So this is aimed at addressing that. I can't predict if it'll be successful or not, but I can predict that we have a shot at it if we embrace our Constitution in the frame. One critic, who's a conservative who I admire, said, oh, Marx thinks he's James Madison. Folks, I don't think I'm James Madison. I just read James Madison. And I'm telling you what James Madison said. Which I think, and I think some of my, very few really, some of my conservative critics better step up to the plate and embrace the Constitution, including Article 5, while there's still some of it left.
Okay.
Did you answer your question? I don't even remember what your question was.
No, you hit it. Enough of my questions. Let's go to the audience.
He got 3. I'm sorry.
If you have a question, if you'd raise your hand, but I ask one thing is just wait until one of our staff members that are in each of these aisles finds you with a microphone, and then you can introduce yourself and ask your question. And we will start with right over here.
Be nice.
Yes, my question is, we're getting a lot of people who are trying to get rid of the Obamacare program, and they're asking for funds and whatever. What are your thoughts? Can Obamacare be stopped at this point?
Well, that's a good question. I run one of the groups that most successfully litigated against Obamacare until it got to the Supreme Court, and Roberts did what he did. And by the way, as a footnote to this, we're now told there's no recourse, it's the law of the land, and that's that. No, that's tyranny. And if the people don't want Obamacare, it should be imposed on us by when the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate by a supermajority and they had the presidency, so that means that's it for the rest of the time, we can never get rid of it. And this is the mentality that is preached to us, quite frankly, by both parties. You've got a few solid men and women who are standing up and saying, defund this and fight it now, and the others saying, no, we'll wait till next week. No, we'll wait to the debt ceiling. No, we'll wait. It's being implemented. There's no waiting. So, no, I don't. Because I'm just being very blunt with you. because the Republican leadership does not want to get rid of it, because they are not even putting up a fight. And they're beating up on guys like Ted Cruz who are trying to put up a fight. And it's disgusting. And in the House, same thing. Now, I think we might, let me amend that. I think we might have a shot at it if we had a solid conservative president in the next cycle in both houses to lead these French Republicans in the House and the Senate to victory so they can see what victory looks like. But that might be the last shot. You're not going to get it. You know, you might win some side issues in the Supreme Court. We may win a big issue on religious liberty in the Supreme Court, but I don't know. But I don't see any avenue to get rid of it unless a solid conservative is elected president and leads a Republican House and Senate to do it. You know, a Reagan-esque type thing. But after the next cycle, it's in. I mean, there are fringes, but it's in. And the debate will now be, oh, it's not working. So you know what they're going to want to do, centralize it more, which is what they always do when things don't work. Sorry.
Over here.
Well, Mark, I was just wondering if you'd consider expanding your audience and your message with this book and going on The Tonight Show, Good Morning America, or Duck Dynasty.
Good what?
Expanding your audience.
What was the last one? Duck Dynasty. I got to grow my beard a little longer. I wouldn't mind on going on Duck Dynasty. Well, let me call the Today Show and see if they'll have me on. That'll answer your question right there. I have been invited on Meet the Depressed. I have been invited on Good Morning America. No, not Good Morning America. Deface the Nation. What's the third one?
Meet the Press.
Meet the Press. What's the third one?
This week with Brink. Yeah.
But why waste your time? They don't have an audience. Those people don't matter, to be perfectly honest. Let me tell you, the purpose of this book is to go over their heads. The purpose of that amendment is to bypass the federal government. I want to get our people thinking about this stuff. I don't really care what Matt Lauer thinks, to be perfectly honest with you.
Let's go over here.
I don't even know if he does think, to be perfectly honest with you.
Thanks for taking my question. In your book, if I read it correctly, you have the $100 million cutoff for regulations for where the legislature can overrule that by vote, or have to approve it rather.
Right.
Okay. It seems you maybe gave up a little bit. Why doesn't the Congress have to write every word of the law that we're forced to follow?
Because you're never going to reverse what's called the non-delegation authority, where Congress delegates authority to a bureaucracy to conduct some of its business, even though I think it's unconstitutional. So the attempt in the book is to be realistic. So Congress is not going to sit there and review every snail darter issue, every issue related to how much poison's in water, and how do I know that? Because they won't even review anything right now. So there's a federal law that exists today, and Congress has this inherent constitutional authority that Congress has the power to review every single regulation it wants to and to pass on it. But what the left does is they put up the filibuster issue in the Senate, so you can't really address what the EPA is doing in the Senate. So what I say is, one of the proposed reforms I have is, any regulation that has an economic market value estimated to be $100 million or more, and it doesn't take much to reach that, as determined by the Government Accountability Office and the Congressional Budget Office together, that regulation must go to Congress before it's issued with a joint committee of Congress, the House and the Senate, have 6 months to review it, and that committee either approves it or disapproves it, and if they sit on it, it's automatically disapproved. In addition, so the EPA can't issue cap-and-trade regulations where Congress refused to pass a cap-and-trade statute. In addition, remember what I said about decision-making? 3/5 of the states have the power to override even that regulation or law if Congress issues it. Because a lot of these regulations are choking the heck out of these states. So you actually have a federal bureaucracy that's more powerful than all the states combined. So the states would have the power within 24 months, these are just my suggestions, to vote by 3/5 majority to override any federal statute or any federal regulation with a $100 million effect. Imagine how that would change Washington. Among other things, Congress couldn't just bulldoze the states. Congress would have to consult with the states. So you might say, yeah, we're in California, but like I say, there's 49 other states. There's other states, and look at the change. You'd be able now to duke it out with your delegates and your state senators, and you'd have another avenue to fight beyond Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. In my state of Virginia, as an example, when Obamacare was passed, our Attorney General, who's a great man, Ken Cuccinelli, and our state legislature voted to protect the citizens of Virginia from Obamacare. Our Attorney General was the first to go into federal court and fight it, and won, and our 2 senators voted for it. That's schizophrenia, isn't it? Something like that. And I have another amendment to deal with that. There's only 11. Libs can only count to 10, but there's 11. And one of them is to repeal the 17th Amendment so that the state legislatures can elect or appoint the senators. And I say in the book, this would be the most difficult of all of them because people say, well, I'm voting for my senator. Well, you're voting for your senator to do what? Your senator is passing laws that give power to a bureaucracy to rule over you. And not to get too philosophical, John Locke made the point that no legitimate government can, or legitimate legislature, can confer its lawmaking authority to another party. And yet this is what Congress does, your point, but there's only so many things we can do about it. So this would be the most difficult battle, but it's the 17th Amendment, more than the Civil War, that eviscerated the states. And that was intentional, because in 1913, the progressives pushed a bunch of amendments, including the federal income tax and the direct election of senators. Why? Well, the federal income tax, obviously, they wanted your property. But the other one was to destroy the states. Woodrow Wilson wanted to destroy the constitutional construct in federalism, as did the progressive movement. Howard Taft promoted these things too. Theodore Roosevelt promoted these things too during the progressive era. And so the state was to serve as a buffer between the individual and the federal government. I want to address one point, because a lot of people watching are thinking, yeah, but the states. Let me tell you something. People talk about the Civil War in the states. There were good states and there were bad states. There was a bad federal government, and there was a good federal government. The Dred Scott decision, which helped precipitate the Civil War, came from what? The federal Supreme Court. The Fugitive Slave Acts, both of them, came from what? The United States Congress. When states like Pennsylvania were running the Underground Railroad, when blacks were escaping their masters in the South, not just the South, parts of the North, as a matter of fact, and going through Pennsylvania and other states, it was the federal Congress that passed 2 laws to try and stop it, the Fugitive Slave Act. So there's a mixed bag, and it's important that we relearn some of our history here. But the fact of the matter is, slavery is over. We're talking about what's going on today. The states and the federal government had some very serious negative behavior, troubling behavior when it came to slavery and so forth, but this isn't about slavery anymore. This is about who makes the decisions over individual liberty.
Right over here.
Well, first of all, Mark, I'd like to thank you for being here. We appreciate that. And secondly, I live in Northern California, so it's refreshing to be around a group of people that you can actually had some wonderful conversations today with a lot of great people, and it's intelligent people, and it's been very, very
So what is it? It's
refreshing.
here in Irvine? Is that it, pretty much? I don't know. I'm just asking.
I never knew there were so many conservatives in California.
Isn't it
Where have you
amazing?
people been hiding? But I think one of the keys to keeping the liberty that we do have is in freedom of the press. And they have abdicated their role to hold politicians accountable. How do we make them accountable to the politicians, accountable to us outside of re-electing a Republican? Because then they would do their job. What's the path to get the media to hold them accountable?
I've got some really good news for you. The Boston Globe is bankrupt. Hold on now. Washington Post is a joke. They're not going to be able to save it. The New York Times is teetering. It's called competition. It's called technology. How many of you read the New York Times every day? Exactly. Well, there's one guy there. Probably needs it for his bird cage, ultimately. But there's a big revolution going on in media right now, and the old media is losing control, and the old media is losing power. So if you watch the old media, it's very depressing. I don't watch it, so I don't get depressed. Just listen to me.
Take one up here in the balcony, Mark.
Don't jump.
Hey, Mark, Alan Combs again. One of the things that I really would like to see you emphasize about the Liberty Amendments, and one of the things that has gotten me really excited about them as being a conservative, is a statistical analysis of it. You talked a little bit about California, New York, Illinois. Anything that can reduce the leftist footprint of states like those, like my state, down to one vote is something that conservatives should be very, very excited about.
His point is, in the convention process based on history and tradition, which would carry over, each state gets one vote, and that's it. Now, they can send as many delegates as they want, or they can agree in advance how many delegates they'll send, but they get one vote, and that's it. So that's his point.
Over here.
Hey, Mark. I'm excited that you're here. I love seeing you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And you should see what's for dinner. Oh, my God.
As long as you didn't cook it.
As long as I didn't cook it?
I didn't miss it.
As long as I didn't cook it? Oh, trust me. Trust me, I didn't.
Really? Okay, so my question is... Okay,
We'd all be eating bologna sandwiches, pretty much.
what can we do, okay, as the people, like, of each state, to get our states off their butts to start this process? I mean, do we start petitions? Do we do... I mean, more than just... I can write my congressman. My congressman's Darrell Issa, great congressman.
Your congressman's irrelevant.
He's a jerk anyway, but he doesn't answer back. I mean, they don't really do anything. But so how do we press our state to everybody? I mean, to start.
All right, first of all, the federal politicians have nothing to do with this, period. This is a state representative and state senator thing. And if you called on them today, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Probably. So we need to have a period where we're informing as many people as we can. And you know, I can't expect every delegate, but for me, I mean, I would be asking them about them before I would vote for them. This would be, yes, I believe in litmus tests, and this would be one of the litmus tests. But we'll lose a bunch before we start to win some of these things. I should let you know, I think it was in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. This process got 32 states for a balanced budget amendment. It came 2 states short. And then it began to unravel. And it was led by Everett Dirksen. And it was the ballot budget amendment. I should also let you know that in, this is fly. How did Obama kill that fly? What the hell? I don't know how to kill these things. Anyway, so 32 states. In 1963, as I explain in the book, Dwight Eisenhower gave a speech at a college, I don't even know if it still exists, called Defiance College, believe it or not. And he specifically, he was so fed up with the Warren Court because he felt so betrayed. And he was so fed up with the massive bureaucracy in 1963. He said to the young people, I want you young folks to know that you have the power to fix this. And Eisenhower specifically spoke about this Article 5 amendment. Reagan referenced it several times, not as specifically as Eisenhower, but he made the point because he desperately wanted this balanced budget amendment. When we say balanced budget amendment, we mean taxing limits, spending limits, balancing requirements, and Congress wouldn't give them the vote. And back then, I think the filibuster required 67 votes or something like that to break it, and the Democrats were blocking it, and some Republicans. And he kept warning the Congress. He kept saying, you know, you keep this up, I'm going to talk to the people in the states about what they can do. So you need to agitate. You need to explain. You need to hold people's feet to the fire. This is an issue they're not thinking about now. This is an issue they don't think will be big. This issue will become, in my estimation, bigger and bigger and bigger as the federal government gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more coercive, and more people are fed up, and they're going to be looking for a way out. And I want them to find a way short of violence. I want them to find a constitutional way to address this, if possible. So a lot depends on what goes on in your community and what you want to do, which I obviously am just not that familiar with.
Time for one last question.
No.
Yes, one last. The dinner's getting cold. I can.
Mark, I think that fly was an NSA bug.
Yeah. Could be.
It seems the purpose of your book, the object of your book, is freedom. And in my research, and it's limited, it seems in the mid-1800s that a big chunk of our freedom was taken away. It seems that the founders and the jury trial system relied on our conscience, not just what the law was represented to us, but if that law wasn't truth, constitutional. It seems to be taken away. I've read that the palladium of liberty is Article 5 and jury trial and the rights of juries to vote their conscience. Moving forward, should that not be a part of this conversation?
Juries?
The right of juries
to do what?
Nullify unconstitutional laws. You said you don't believe in that.
Hold on now. Juries almost never hear constitutional cases. These are cases often without juries.
But it seems that the government's power, when it's applied to us, is through the law, it's through the court systems.
Well, you and I have a little disagreement. I don't support anarchy where juries are in this state are doing this and juries are doing that. I don't support anarchy on the bench either, where judges are defying the law, or on the Supreme Court either. That's not liberty. And I don't think juries are the issue here, because there's a lot of crazy juries too, depending on what part of the country we're talking about. So I don't think the jury process is the proper process. If I'm a litigant and I have a jury trial, if it's a criminal case or a civil case, I want to get a fair shake. I don't want those people thinking about, well, who passed that law and who made that decision? No. I want to make sure that if there's a case involving me, that jury is independent and that jury is going to make a decision based on that. That's 99% of the jury cases. The problem, the jury you speak of, I think, is the Supreme Court or these circuit courts. And the problem is there is no recourse whatsoever to a Supreme Court decision other than another Supreme Court, and they bind themselves with precedent. So I approach it a little differently than you, which is fine, but my problem is when the Supreme Court rules and says this is the law of the land for all time, that can't be right. There's got to be some other recourse here. Somebody has to have a final say, but that's not what the Constitution says. And a lot of people dispute this with me, but I said, well, where does it say it? Well, there's this implied this. I didn't say that. I said, where is it? So there's judicial review because the cases are brought to the court and the court makes decisions. Well, let me give you an example, and I cite this in the Liberty Amendments. Abraham Lincoln rejected the Dred Scott decision's morality. It was an immoral decision. Taney was a racist and he was a slaveholder. He was also Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And Lincoln said, how come two parties who bring a case to the Supreme Court, two parties, that court, tie up the nation forever? The people never had a say in this. So I really take this from Lincoln. How can the Supreme Court say that Obamacare is constitutional when it amends the Constitution and rewrites the law and tells us that that's the law of the land? When we, with our own two eyes, read their ruling, hear it with our own two ears, we don't want it, we know it's unconstitutional, so 5 justices and that's it, there's no recourse, and that's the law of the land, we're told. As I said earlier, no, that's tyranny. And the fact of the matter is, the framers would be, what do you think the founders would do about something like that? You think they'd be as nice as me? You think they'd say, oh, let's look at Article 5? They might, but they'd say other things too. So what I'm saying is, there needs to be recourse, as an example to your point, and I have it in the book, there needs to be recourse for a great nation. When the body politic says no, there needs to be recourse beyond the luck of one justice or another justice being selected, where every June, as I say on the air, we sit on the edge of our seats and wonder, what are they going to do in this case or that case, and how is it going to affect my life? That's not representative constitutional government. That's a Politburo. And so, while the court is right a lot of times, it's wrong a lot of times, the institution's imperfect like every other institution, the members are imperfect like every other human being on the face of the earth. So to me, the final recourse should be not majoritarianism, which the framers rejected, not pluralism, where the people just vote on it, which they absolutely rejected, but what did they do? The states, where 3/5 of the states, and it's hard to get 3/5 of the states, would override a majority decision of the Supreme Court, expunge it, not amend it, not rewrite it, just end it. And so that's one of the suggestions in the book. You want to take one more, please? Just one more. Okay. Just one more.
Last question right here.
Mark, thank you for the book and your ideas.
Well, unfortunately, he's first.
I have a specific question for those of us here in hyper blue California.
Move.
It's good. It's great that 34 other states can do this. But where do we channel our energy here? I have a state assembly person who is about to participate in a total gutting of the Second Amendment in the next week or two in the California legislature. This person will not be receptive to anything that I have to say. And many people here might feel disenfranchised, like I do. How can we put your ideas into action in California?
How many other states are there?
34. 49.
Right.
Yeah.
And our banking system works how? How does our banking system work?
nationally?
Can you write checks out of state?
Yes.
Can you participate in events out of state?
Yes.
There you go.
Go to other states.
This guy's going to jump here.
Yeah, I know. All right, this is the last one right up here.
Last one.
I don't need a microphone. I haven't read the book, but I'd like to know. We're post one man, one vote. Amnesty bearing down on us. What is our time frame here?
I don't know. I'm not Nostradamus. I don't know. But I'd say it's not long. Look, America will survive. There will always be an America. It just won't be Ronald Reagan's America. And this is a huge problem. I mean, you know, when Reagan was president, we could pick our own doctors, our own health care, our own insurance, and all the rest of it. And starting October 1st, all of that changes. And shortly after that, it changes even more. And people who have full-time jobs, many are going to have part-time jobs. And you're not going to be able to pick the doctor you want because that doctor's going to quit, or you just won't be able to get to that doctor. Or you won't be able to get into the hospital and get the treatment you want, and on and on and on and on. And what Obamacare does, it gives the government control over you. And you're going to give the government the data. This isn't some conspiracy. It's even in the liberal media. You're going to give the government the data. The IRS is going to be the enforcement arm. Whether or not you get certain care, Sarah Palin was right about this. The government will decide. That's a fact. So you're talking about open borders. I couldn't agree with you more. But, you know, I could sit here and go through the litany, right? That's what we always do. But the question is there a way to address it? And if I thought we could address it in 12 hours, why would I write a book? I'd just have a 12-hour national seminar and say, let's go. Well, it doesn't work that way. It took us 100 years to get here. Let's at least spend 20 trying to get it back. That's all. Dinner time.
First, I want to thank Mark again for coming out tonight. A quick housekeeping item for all of you joining us for dinner, and I think that's all of you. Go out that way through those doors towards the Air Force One Pavilion. But it's a tradition at the Reagan Library for us to leave our distinguished guests with a gift. In this case, the gift I thought originally of giving to Mark would be one of these great hats, but I couldn't give it to Mark because it says I stand with Mark Levin, and he is Mark Levin, so he can't stand with Mark Levin. But speaking of President Reagan, we got Mark
a box,
a different kind of a hat.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me?
This is the one you're looking at upstairs.
Oh, my God. You are listening to me. That is a beautiful hat.
So with that, we'll get you bigger size.
Thank you, buddy. This hat's for a normal size head. So I have to kick it up a notch.
Thank you. We'll see you all at dinner.